Hey, folks, this podcast is brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got paid contests coming to states near you. They're giving out boosts and bonuses. They're slashing lines all day long. Hop in those player prop DFS contests. It's a real fun platform over there. And folks, you can follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. About to have an off week for the UFC. Sorry I didn't get to do the podcast as usual this week. I had the flu, then my wife and son got the flu. So we'll be back to business as usual this upcoming week. Follow me on Instagram at RotoBrady MMA. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. You can find us on Apple Music and Amazon Music now. And then, the UFL season is getting started here soon, post Super Bowl. And so look out for my UFL gambling content and my MMA DFS value articles that come out through RotoBaller. And this is another interlude episode of the Tap That MMA podcast. And with me here today,
prevail. Whoa! The Westside Strangler did it! Beautiful!
you heard it there. He is an OG of the sport, 21 and 13 overall in his professional career. That went from 1996 until 2012. Give it up for Chris Brennan. Chris, thank you so much for being here today, man. How's it going?
Awesome, man. Thank you very much.
So,
Pleasure.
Just to go to that clip we were just listening to. So you get that Kimura at Pride Bushido 1, and what you don't see that happened before that clip is that whole long controversy in the middle of the fight about whether he tapped to the first armbar you had. They resume activity, you snatch up that submission in not too much time. But in that moment, like when you're sitting there waiting for whatever to happen and whatever decision makers are, at play there in Pride, what were those moments like where you were waiting for them to figure out, like, is the fight over? Is the fight still going on?
So, on a normal circumstance, that wouldn't have been a big deal. I mean, it would have sucked, but on this circumstance, I took the fight on Monday, and the fight was at 183 pounds. And so it was already like I was out of shape. I was opening a gym. I wasn't prepared for the fight, so I wasn't in shape. So once I won in like a minute and a half, whatever it was, 2 minutes, I was excited. I was like, sweet, it's over. And then when I realized that we were going to probably fight again, I was like, oh man, I smoked myself getting that first armbar. And he tapped, and the referee jumped in and he screamed. And then I turned around and walked away, and they said he didn't. So I was like, oh my God, we got to fight again. And I wasn't sure if they were going to fight again or what they were going to do. But they brought in like six referees into the ring and discussed it for a couple minutes, probably like 5 minutes. So it gave me a little bit of break, and then they made us fight again. Looking back later, the second half of that fight was way more exciting than the first half. So I was happy that it worked out that way.
It's just funny when like they bring in more people to discuss what to do in that situation. I don't know what the discussion's about. It's either did you see any indications of a tap that would allow you to stop it, or did you not? That's really all it comes down to.
Right, right.
Or
T-tap.
like did it like for like MMA promotions operating in certain areas of the world in certain periods of time. Like who knows what they were discussing. And so you have fought in a ton of places all over the world. Some very fun fight experience that you had in Japan throughout your career. Notably, I just got done watching the fight with Takanori Gomi at Shooto Treasure Hunt 10 in 2002. Now, that was a unanimous decision for Takanori Gomi, but there was certainly controversy behind that decision. What was your take from that fight? I love the Shooto stuff, especially from back in the day.
Yeah.
And it's crazy in those promotions, like the people that you end up like, oh my God, he fought that guy and that promote that long ago. Oh my God.
Yeah, honestly, that was my favorite fight of all time. Of all 36 of my fights, that was my favorite fight. Um, he was the number one guy in the world at the time. He had not been taken down yet in a fight, and I think I took him down four times. Um, my first fight at 155, which was really brutal. It was a tough cut for me. Most of my career was at 170, but I did have fights from 55 to 70 to 85. But yeah, once it went the distance, I was like, chances are he's the champion. Me getting the nod is going to be difficult. I think in the United States, I probably would have, but I felt like I won 1 and 3. And in round two, I had a bit of a dip conditioning wise just because of the cut. But by round three, again, I felt, fantastic again. Uh, Looking back, I tried to jujitsu him a lot. And I think if I would have just used the positions that I got to strike from, it would have been better. Joaquin Hansen fought him right after I did, and he kind of implemented the same game plan, but punched, in positions more and won a decision over Gomi. And Gomi, anytime he was getting a position on me, he was striking more, and he wasn't hurting, but he did land more punches. So I guess that's why he got the nod. But I think positionally and like there was no catches. Then a lot of people don't know what a catch is, but like I had him locked up in a Kimura and no catch, no, and that's like a point right away for that round. And so I don't know, fantastic fight though. It was fun. A lot of learning moments in that fight as well. That was when I really began developing my Kimura game. And so there's some wins and losses in that fight that I study on a lot.
And like, the thing about Takanori Gomi, the Fireball Kid, you avoid like the big right hand that everybody knows that he has and that he's famous for. But he's always been an underrated grappler, and grappling that is practical for MMA purposes. Like he's I
Yeah.
think a four-time Japanese combat like wrestling champion. Um,
Yeah.
but like I could see easily why you'd say like that's your favorite fight of your career, because I mean that is such a piece of like in the MMA time capsule. Like the look that you had at the time was just like perfect for MMA in 2002. Takanori Gomi has an iconic look, like with
Oh yeah.
the nickname, the showmanship, the bleach blonde hair, and everything. And for it to have happened not in the UFC or Pride, I think makes it all the more special.
Yeah, I think it was cool. A lot of people thought it was Pride. People that look back now or talk about it now thought it was Pride. And I was like, no, that happened in Shooto, man. It was for the Shooto belt. Um, and that was before I even and got over to Pride. But he was such a big deal there, and he was such a big name at the time. So it was a good opportunity for me. I was actually fighting, like I said, at 170, and I think Shooto's weight was 167, and I had a booked fight with Sakurai, and Sakurai got hurt mid camp, and they asked if I'd fight Gomi, and we said yes, but then realized after we got off the phone that Gomi fights at 55, and so I had actually cut 50 pounds over 8 weeks to make that debut at 155 against him.
So, and maybe people that are newer fans to the sport, and people even people who appreciate Pride, still don't necessarily appreciate like how much better the sport is when Japan has a really strong like thing
Oh
going.
yeah.
Like I mean, I love Ryzen right now, and that is kind of keeping the ball rolling for Japan. But Sengoku, Shooto, Dream, back when that was a thing. Like there's so many fun promotions in Japan. I love the way that they approach sports as fans, as spectators. I love the showmanship of the Japanese MMA. So when Japanese MMA is strong, the entire sport is stronger as a whole.
For sure, no question. It was always a blast fighting over there. Their promotions were always amazing. Walking out at Saitama Super Arena in Pride was unreal. And the Gomi fight was at like it was right by the Tokyo Dome, but it was at a hall. It wasn't even in an arena. It was at a hall, and there was still probably a couple thousand people there. But it was pretty amazing that fight took place there like that. On that same card, Shaolin fought on that card. Hobson Mora, like there was Kid Yamamoto, like it was a stacked card.
I love that stuff going back through people's records in MMA when they fought like from 99 to 2006 and it's like what the hell Chael Sonnen fought Jeremy Horn at Battle on the River 6, like that's awesome. Those people had no idea what they were getting to see at the time even.
Right. Right.
So the background story of like how you got into mixed martial arts, where it at least the abbreviated version available on the internet and whatnot is like you were working as a bouncer, you saw UFC one, and you're like, oh my God, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and Royce Gracie, and
Yeah.
that isn't it amazing how many people's story boils down to I saw Royce Gracie at UFC one. I really like decided I had to do that.
That went on for 5 or 6 years. People would still see UFC one, two, or three 5 years later, and that's still what got them into it. Just seeing Hoist be effective against big guys with jiu-jitsu. Like, oh, I can do it. I can do it.
It's a powerful thing that doesn't exist anymore because there's not
Yeah.
open weight stuff anymore. But at the time, like, all the people that say that, like, I saw this, like, dude who looked like he was not 150 pounds soaking wet. And, like, he's wearing out and submitting Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn and Chemo. And GSP said, like, I didn't even understand what I was seeing, like, at the time. But so it is amazing still today the effect that Royce Gracie's run at UFC one had on the entire sport.
Oh yeah, unreal. And people today still don't understand that where we are today is because of that. It is literally because of that. He fought, I think, 3 times at UFC one, 4 times at UFC two, and then only once at UFC three. Yeah, had chemo first, and then back at UFC four for multiple fights again, and then a super fight with Ken at UFC six, and it was just like he fought big guys, karate guys, other grapplers like Ken, like he fought a mix of all the guys, and there's a lot of stories that they picked and choose who they fought, but he still fought of all sizes and all martial arts at the time, and put them away.
I mean, still did all that, and really the only striking weapon that he had in his arsenal was that like flicking teep, for the most part. Like he was agreeing to do that without knowing that those dudes were gonna have a huge advantage in the wrestling and striking departments, and it didn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And his arm walking out like this. That was it.
It's crazy because UFC one, like there was professional mixed martial arts before UFC one that really looks closer to the sport we know today than UFC one did because everybody was a one, for the most part, a one discipline specialist in those early days. But it like the impact of UFC one still to this day is like go in especially like a town in Florida and California along the East Coast. And every 10 minutes when you see a jiu-jitsu place, that is because of UFC one. Like you can absolutely trace that back. The jiu-jitsu boom in the United States goes back to that one evening back in 1993.
No question. No question. It did. And it's you can see stuff like that, like more mixed stuff back then in other organizations. But the main thing was to show that jiu-jitsu was better than any other single martial art. And at the time it showed that. Dan Severn was the wrestler, got triangled. Ken Shamrock, shoot fighter, got rear naked choked. Like all these guys got submitted in their single styles. And if there was someone that was had already been cross training or doing something else, at the time, that wasn't even the point. The point was to show the world that jiu-jitsu was the best, and that's what exploded across the United States at that time, and still today.
And I think there's been like a trend from fans and analysts alike. Like right now, I think people perceive kickboxing or Muay Thai to be a more important martial art for MMA, but it's so skewed because everybody competing in mixed martial arts at a high level is really good at jujitsu. So like jujitsu gets a weird reputation now because it seems like it doesn't work as well, but it's like it's working just fine because a lot of people that aren't getting submitted have good submission defense at the very least, even if they're not in the controlling positions.
100%. Anytime someone's on their back, if there's any sort of guard, they're doing jiu-jitsu. If there wasn't such thing as a guard, people would be dead. Um, Turtle, they're turtling. I guess that could be wrestling as well. But yeah, I mean, jiu-jitsu takes place in, I mean, go Google UFC champions from top to bottom. Wrestling is way up here. Then it's jiu-jitsu, some other grappling art, and then it blends into boxing, kickboxing, and all those. If you break them down like that, the grappling arts are going to be the most dominant, no question about it.
And so, not long into your professional career, you had already fought Pat Miletich twice before you even fought in the UFC for the first time back at UFC 16. That was at Extreme Challenge 9 and Extreme Challenge Trials, both in 1997. So you win the reserve bout at UFC 16 in 1998 against Courtney Turner. And then you end up being the alternate who steps in to fight Pat Miletich for the welterweight in the welterweight tournament finale. Um, so we started off talking about that break that had to be taken in the middle of the Pride fight because of the question about the tap. This is a situation that does not exist almost at all in the sport moving forward. Is like sitting there on the same night wondering if you're going to fight or not. Like that is a crazy thing that I think a lot of newer fans would be shocked by.
Yeah. So you said early in my career, I fought Pat. Let's just start that with too early in my career. I fought Pat. I had 4 fights, and he was already like the number 1 or number 4 guy in the world at the time. But I went to a 20-minute draw with him, 1 round, and then we fought again 2 months later. I went to a 30-minute split decision loss with him, also 1 round. And so I was like, okay, I'm on this same level as this guy. He's a better wrestler, so that's how he kept ending up on top of me, and I was fighting from my back, but he couldn't even get close to finishing me. So we in the tournament, it was a whole different deal because there was only a 4-man tournament. So I assumed you're going to fight your second fight no matter what, right? If there was an 8-man tournament, there was going to have to be 3 fights. Then I could see someone getting hurt and not fighting their third fight. But being 2 fights, I figured I'm good. So after my first fight, I was up in the stands eating a hot dog, relaxing, watching the fights. And then I see Mikey Burnett and Eugenio Tadao beating the living shit out of each other. And I'm like, oh. And as I'm watching it, it starts to click in my head. And I was like, oh, man, I should probably go downstairs and check and make sure, that I'm not going to fight. And I put my food down and I go back out of the arena into the tunnel. And as I'm going down there, John Peretti's running down the hall. Chris Brennan, start warming up. And I was like, oh, man, all right, I get to fight. And then I get in the back and I start to warm up and I'm like, oh, shit, I'm fighting Pat again. I was like, man, and so it was exciting to fight. But the main difference that I think I've only talked about one time between me and him in our first 2 fights and me and him in our third fight. Our first 2 fights were at our walking around weight. I was 185 pounds, and we fought at that weight. The UFC was the first lightweight tournament at the time. Lightweight was 170. They didn't have a 155 yet. So we took the fight at 170. I had never cut weight before leading up to this fight. So a month out, I'm 170 pounds. I cut down to 170, dieted, trained my whole time at 170. Well, they basically carried Pat to the scale, and he could barely walk. And I was like, oh man, he looks like crap. I'm gonna smoke this guy this time. And then on fight night, Pat was 185 plus pounds, 190 pounds, and I was still 170 pounds. So that's the first time that he actually felt much bigger and much stronger than me in the cage. And it wore on me. I think he beat me like 9 or 10 minutes up against the fence, choked me with the fence. But yeah, I was frustrated. I was a blue belt also in jiu-jitsu at the time. So that was like my strength was jiu-jitsu and I was only a blue belt.
And I mean, Pat Miletich, one of the great pioneers of the sport, like that's a person that understood the mixed martial arts component of mixed martial arts sooner than a lot of other people. And I
Oh yeah.
just I just noticed that your first two fights, so you had spent 50 minutes in a fight with Pat Miletich before UFC 16. Two decision, one a draw, so only one result out of 50 minutes, both in 1997, and both of those fights happened in Davenport, Iowa, literally Pat Miletich's backyard.
His best man was our referee in the second fight. No lie, no lie. Mark Hansen.
God, it's just I sometimes I wish there were more one night tournaments. I definitely wish there were still more Grand Prix in mixed martial arts at the highest level. But one night tournaments, that's an awesome concept. And PFL or like slash World Series of Fighting was kind of doing that even up to like a handful of years ago. Like it was like when Chris Curtis was still there. But you know, same thing, same issue with Grand Prix at all, except amplified by a lot is that you're probably not going to end up with the exact Grand Prix field that you start off with, the same tournament field. Like, even if the
Sure.
fights are months apart, you're still probably not going to end up with the exact bracket progressing the way you thought. And it's like in that UFC Militich fight, Mike Goldberg, it's just funny where the understanding was of the sport at the time. And I give a lot of credit to Mike Goldberg for picking up something alien to him as quickly as he did. But when they were talking about you and Pat Miletich, it was like, well, Pat Miletich already did this. Like it took him that much time in his first fight. Chris Brennan's first fight was, quick. So, the fatigue factor has got to be in Chris Brennan's favor right now. And it's like, man, I don't care if he fought for 30 seconds like earlier in the night. The idea of fighting again, especially when you weren't expecting to, the chemical roller coaster ride that your body's going through for that, it's it
Oh
just
yeah.
it's just a very crazy thing to put someone through.
Oh yeah. It's always, up and down roller coaster, but that was one of the times where you let your, you let your emotions down, you let your guard down, you calm down, relax, and then all of a sudden it's like boom, spiked again. And not only that, I went into my locker room, which was the locker room of Eugenio, the guy that got beat up by Mikey Burnett. And he comes in and he is delirious and he's trying to stand up and his team's making him lay down and he's stand up, his eyes are beat like he was just delirious. I mean, he got, concussed pretty good. And I'm just trying to look the other way and jump rope. So I don't even look at this guy because I don't want to, I'm just trying to move on to my fight now. But yeah, it was just great time, great time. It was a bummer that I got to fight for the UFC belt and had to lose to Pat. But if there was anybody to lose to, it might as well be the guy who went on to be a 5-time champion. And and at the time, I was obviously very serious about the sport, but I didn't have the training gym or teammates and whatnot to get ready for that type of thing. And so I was just doing my thing. And my goal was to get to the UFC and hear John McCarthy say, "Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's get it on." And when I did, he looked across the cage at me and he goes, "This is for the UFC lightweight championship. Are you ready?" And I was like, "Oh God, it is. Oh, it is." And then he asked Pat, and I was like, "Well, here we go." But I didn't realize until I'm standing in the cage and I'm fighting for the belt, the first belt. And, Pat got it. I love Pat. We're still friends today. And, I cornered Jeremy Horn a couple times for him later because he couldn't get out to where he was. I fought for Pat one night at an Extreme Challenge in Utah, replaced him the night before he got sick. And I showed up the next night and fought for him. We've been buddies since.
And Pat Miletich also, to your point, one of the first people to really figure out like how to put together an absolutely murderer's row of a fight camp. You know, as one of the famous early ones. I read the whole like Matt Hughes book about like what that whole time period was and what those people were like, and it's not just the Militich fighting systems either. There, you know, it was a smaller community at the higher levels of MMA back in the day, and people tended to know, you know, who people were when they were
Oh yeah.
there. And so, like those people that did have the advantage of like having a camp together of people that were all legitimate murderers in mixed martial arts, like it showed, and it ended up molding the sport for, you know, the next decade after that because of it.
Oh, at one point the UFC only had 5 belts, and Pat had 3 of them in his gym, and the other 2 belts were guys who came in and out of training at his gym. You know, they weren't uh, like Jens Pulver or Jeremy Horn guys, like staples, like Matt Hughes and those guys, but they were guys like Rich Franklin, um, Tim Sylvia had the belt. You know, there was other guys that like cruised in and out of Militich's gym to train that were winning championships as well. So maybe he could claim all 5 at some point, but he had 3 of the 5 at one point in time, and that was pretty crazy to hear. You know, it's like ATT or Syndicate or someone right now holding 5 of the 7 or 8, whatever they are, how many there are now, but that'd be a wild thing.
It's wild enough right now when there's 3 people who are champions from the same country, or from the same continent. Hell, like forget country. And I had Tony Freakland on this podcast a couple months ago, and he was talking about like some of the sparring sessions at Militich, and as he said, with some of like the bigger guys, the heavyweights. Now he could have been talking about Brad Eames, the dude who was on The Ultimate Fighter. He also could have been
Yeah.
talking about Tim Sylvia, though, and I can't imagine a sparring session with Tim Sylvia.
Yeah, God, that'd be brutal. That'd be brutal. And you know what I heard from pretty much everyone I ever talked to from there, that Jens Pulver was the hardest hitting guy in that room.
That's amazing.
Everyone's spurred by that.
Like, how was it in these early days of your career and in mixed martial arts that the opportunity for UFC 16 even came about?
So I was fighting. Me and Carlos Newton were alternates to fight in Extreme Battlecade when Pat fought Matt Hume, John Lewis fought Kenny Monday, and John Lober fought Kevin Jackson. I was an alternate for Lober or for John Lewis and Kenny Monday, and Carlos Newton was the alternate for John Lober and Kevin Jackson. And we obviously didn't get to fight. And then the following event was Extreme Battlecade 4. They booked me and Pat Militich to fight on that card, and then that card fell through. So then Monty books me to fight Pat for his show, Monty Cox, for the first Extreme Challenge that me and Pat fought in. Then we went to a draw, and I was a rash dick, so I started talking trash and got a rematch for the next event, and we fought to that 30-minute split decision. And at the time, John Peretti he had gone from being the matchmaker for Battlecade Extreme Challenge to being the matchmaker for the UFC. So when that all took place, I was bummed, to be honest, that I didn't get right into the tournament. But they had booked Townsend Saunders, who was an Olympian. So he hadn't even fought, but they gave him his shot because he was an Olympian, and he got in there and he lost to Pat before I fought Pat. And then that was how I got in. They called. To be honest, I think Monty probably put my name in the hat, even though he was not my manager. He helped me out a lot through different times and stuff, just because of my wars with Pat, and I was pretty easy to work with. I think I fought Pat for 30 minutes for $1,000.
It's crazy to think that like you and future UFC champion Carlos Newton were just casually waiting as alternates for this other tournament. Um,
Yeah.
and so like after UFC 16, there was Extreme Challenge 22. There was the Bosworth Invitational in 1999. You close out 1999 fighting on King of the Cage 1, colon Bas Rutten's King of the Cage. I love pretty much everything that Bas Rutten attaches his name to. And that's where you won the inaugural King of the Cage middleweight super fight champion over Joe Daddy Stevenson.
Right.
So King of the Cage, another promotion that I don't think people will ever be able to appreciate now what it was in terms of quality, what it represented for the sport at the time. It put on so many great events, and you go back to a bunch of old videos from the 90s, the early 2000s, and King of the Cage was putting on some of the best fights in the world before people knew the names of some of those great fighters. So what was that first King of the Cage event like? And, what was King of the Cage like in general, in your experience fighting under that banner all the times that you did?
It was, uh, man, it was. So I was brought in to lose for sure to Joe Stevenson. Joe Stevenson was Terry Treblecock, who is the owner of King of the Cage, and Ted Williams, who is the partner and was the gym owner and Joe Stevenson's coach. They brought me in for sure to lose. He talked a lot of trash before the fight, so I went in, and he was young. He was 17 years old, so he was the favorite for all of the local people there, and they booed me walking out. And he had been calling my house, telling me that he was going to bang my wife, and Ted Williams would call my house and tell me, it takes me 10 minutes to submit him, and I'm 280 pounds. There's no way you submit him, and blah, blah, blah. And at the time, I'm training with Marco Huas, and I was just like, what do I do if I catch this kid? And he said, don't let go. Whatever you catch him in, don't let go. And I said, okay. So I triangle him, and I put him to sleep. First, sorry, back up. He walked out. Speaking of the Hoist Gracie thing, he walks out with his hand like this, and I thought he was coming out to jab, and I parry his jab down and punch him in the face while he was supposedly coming out to touch gloves. So they booed me right off the bat. But there had been so much build up to that fight, there was no way I was touching gloves. And at the time, I've chilled out as a more grown up, but at the time I was a motherfucker. And so I triangle and put him to sleep. And I stand up, and instantly when I stand up, I look at Ted Williams. I said, "It takes you 10 minutes to tap him like that," because it was at 2 minutes, and he takes off for the gate because I wouldn't let go. Larry Landis was sitting on my head trying to break my triangle, and I put Joe to sleep. And Ted took off to the gate, and Marco Huas went the other way and met him at the gate and was like, "Nope, not gonna let you," because he wanted to come after me. And there was just all sorts of drama. We end up almost in like a 20-on-20 thing in the back with my guys and his guys. Then they book me the very next card to fight Antonio McKee, also out of Ted Williams' gym. And they talk about this guy as the next, whatever. And he was a killer. He was 10-0, I think, at the time. He was a fantastic fighter, wrestler. He was beating me in the first round. And I told my student Jeremy, I said, man, I can't submit him. He's just hanging on and not trying anything. And he said, knock him out. And 9 seconds into the round, I knocked him out with a head kick. And then they started to like me at King of the Cage after that.
At UFC 16, they were even talking about the skills that you had in the kickboxing department. Even though, the thing that you had the most expertise in at the time was, certainly jujitsu. And I'll never understand, especially in MMA, how people will do the things that you say his camp and him were doing before the fight. And then afterward, it's like, "Ugh, I'm gonna rush in the cage and fight." It's like, dude, what you think was gonna happen, man? Like this is the concept. This is the risk of talking all that shit. Is like, and now no one has ever made anything better or made themselves look better by after your trash talk gets thrown back in your face. Now going and wanting to fight her. Like, dude, this was the fight. This
Yeah.
Chris Brennan versus Joe Stevenson. That was the fight. That was where the whole lead up. So there's no fight afterward. Like once I throw what you said back at me.
Yeah, it was, and that's what I tell my kids is like, all the shit someone talks, at the end of the day, you got to get in the cage with the guy and fight. That's what the whole thing is. You got to get in the cage and fight. So all they're trying to do is put you in a mindset where you're more concerned about what they're saying to you instead of what you have to do to them. I think it's more on them trying to distract you from doing what your job is than it is anything else. And that's why my kids have won state. Tyler's won the Pac-12 wrestling championships. Lucas was 9-0 in Bellator, brutal knockouts, and his biggest cheer was like he raised his hand up and smiled. I mean, he didn't go bananas because he doesn't talk shit before and he doesn't talk shit after. So it's just our whole thing was always no highs, no lows. Just do your thing.
It's like the one mistake that you can make with the trash talk and the pre-fight stuff is getting really upset about it. You could see it happening, like, with Jose Aldo in real time when the whole McGregor Aldo stuff was happening. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, he was saying on, like, the cameraman's following him and he's saying, I want to knock that guy out so bad. And it's like, what are you doing? He's winning.
Yeah.
It's working. Dude, come on. He's not really the king of Rio. He's not from there. Just don't let him bother you.
Yeah. That was crazy.
So that was for the King of the Cage middleweight super fight championship. You defended that, as you said, against Antonio McKee. For folks who don't know, that is the father of AJ McKee. Love that we're starting to see more and more father-son combos, like, at the high levels. And so then it's like the King of the Cage middleweight championship, like straight up. That was at KOTC 10 and 11. That then you defended it. So the fights in Japan, those start to come along in like 2002 is when you end up taking the fight. We're talking origami right after you beat Shannon Rich, I believe, the first time in Mexico. So, and then that started a stretch of, two straight fights in Japan. You'd fight two more times, in 2003 and 2004, in the Pride Bushido 1 and 2 events. And some weird weight stuff. Like, Wikipedia says the fight at Pride Bushido 1 was heavyweight. There's no way, there's no way that can be accurate. But how did it come?
But it was their weight class at the time was 185. Like the second guy I fought in Pride that I lost the decision to is the guy who triangled Anderson Silva, and that was that weight class at the time, and that was their lightest weight class at the time until I fought Kawajiri. I think that was the first time they had the 161 weight class, and I was able to actually cut down. But I was fighting guys way bigger than me, like way, way bigger.
So, like, how did it even, like, how was the opportunity presented to you? Like, yo, like, you fought in California, Hawaii, Connecticut, Mexico, like, so many other, but there's some really good fights for you in Japan.
So, so for King of the Cage, when I fought Joe Hurley, Pride was there, Yukino Kondo was there. They had a contract for me. And me and Terry butted heads always. And there was a lot of, before that fight, there was a lot of weight BS that they made me do 3 different times and make this cut after agreeing that I didn't have to cut. And I had to cut literally the night before the fight in order for the fight to take place. And Pride was there. Had I won the fight, I was going to fight Sakuraba. And they changed these weights on me multiple times. So I had no excuses, but I just had zero energy for the fight. And I lost, and they literally ripped up the contract in front of me in the backstage at King of the Cage. So that fight went out the window. So then later I come back, I fight Steve Berger, I think, or first Kevin Hogan, then Steve Berger. Then the UFC calls. I lose in the UFC a decision to Gil Castillo, who had just lost a decision for the 185 title and came back to 170 and beat me by decision. And then I can't remember who my fight was after Gil. But does it say?
Yeah, it's John Chrysostomou,
It's on.
Warrior.
Yeah, so I fought in Hawaii, beat him, and then Pride had to be shortly after that. UFC calls me, wants me to fight Joe Stevenson right when Joe wins the Ultimate Fighter. And I was like, okay. But then they offered me 3-3. And I was like, I'm not fighting for 3-3, and he's like, he just came off the show. He's the Ultimate Fighter winner. It'll be big. We'll put you guys on the poster. And I was like, what's he making? And then I don't know, I think it was like 10-10. I was like, no, bro, I beat him in 2 minutes. I'm not fighting him for 3-3. So a week goes by. Joe Silva calls me back. He was the matchmaker at the time, and he's like, "Hey, we can pay you 4-4, and we'll put you on the poster, and we'll give you a X amount of fight deal." And Joe again starts talking trash again, and I didn't have anything lined up at the time, so I said okay. And they said they'll send me the contract. A month goes by, no contract. The Gracie Fighting Championships call me, want me to fight Shaolin, and then I fought him, and then another guy named Adam DeSabato. But they offered me 20,000 flat, and I said yes. And it was 35 days before the UFC fight. And as soon as I said yes, they post it, and Joe Silva calls me freaking out. You can't take that fight. You got this fight. And I was like, oh, I never even got a contract for you. You never sent it back to us. I was like, no, I never got it. So he says, well, you can't take that fight. And I said, listen, they're paying me 20,000 flat. You guys are paying me 4-4, and whatever. I said, I'm going to take the fight. Dana calls me and says, Chris, if you take this fight, you're done with the UFC. And I said, okay. And at that time I was married and my anniversary was coming up. And I said, tell you what, I said, hook me up with, and he had given me tickets to the UFC multiple times before this. I said, hook me up with good seats to the fight coming up, and I'll do it. And he goes, I can't really. And I hung up the phone, and that was it. I then go to Big Bear to train for my fight. And by the time I get there, the Underground Forum had a post from Dana that was titled Chris Brennan is a fucking pussy. And it had 40 pages of people, basically bashing Dana for being the CEO and talking like that about me. And we went, I didn't get into it with Dana anymore. We didn't talk for probably a decade from that time until UFC 125. But I did go to that event. And while I was at that event, the Pride people were sitting at the pool at Mandalay, and I was walking by, and they said, hey, Chris Brennan. And I looked back, and they called me over, and I went over there and I sat down with them for 5 minutes. And I went home that weekend, and they called me on that Monday, and that was that fight I fought in Pride. Bushido won that following Sunday, I believe. And then, me and Dana didn't talk for years. And then somebody posted, something happened on Twitter, and somehow me and Dana and Joe Rogan got tagged. And someone said something, oh, this is awkward. And Dana said something back, and I said, tell me you love me, Dana. And he goes, I love you, bro. And then all of a sudden it was squashed, whatever. And that following weekend, he gave me and my brothers 6 tickets to UFC 125 when Gray Maynard and Frankie fought their second time, the crazy fight. And we've been cool ever since. Thank goodness, because now here I am with my sons waiting on a short notice to get into the UFC right now here in Vegas. He's 11-2 and waiting.
And so, like, when, Pride had been around, more or less since like 97, what was the state? And I get it had been around from the beginning since like 97 and was pretty much done 4 years after your first fight in Pride. What was the state of it at the time? Like, was it like something that did it feel like something that people reminisce about now when they talk about how they miss Pride? Was that like the feeling when you were at those events of like, that like this is not like this is not secondary. This is the other premier MMA promotion in the world.
No doubt. No doubt. And they paid better. The fans there were amazing. There is a clip right now. My friend just sent me a picture of it at the end of Smashing Machine. I don't know if you've seen it, but at the end of Smashing Machine, the Mark Kerr movie, there is a clip of Mark Kerr sitting at the front of a bus, and I'm directly behind him talking to Mark Holman, who's directly behind me, and my buddy Tracy on the other side. that bus ride was like the crazy. The whole shootbox team was on there. The Hammer House guys were on there. Like the boss, Dean Lister. Like there was like the toughest bus that ever drove anywhere. And it was so cool at the time. And we'd leave the hotel and the fans would be throwing flowers at the bus and stuff until we were gone. And then they'd be waiting at the arena by the time we got there. They'd be waiting in the hotel lobby with presents and things for you to sign all week long. It was just a whole different culture of fans. Like they were fully educated. There was no booing. I go to the UFC now all the time. Like I was just there last weekend or 2 weeks ago when Patty fought. And from fight one to the end, they boo during every fight, no matter what's going on, unless it's standing in the middle of the cage, swinging for the fences and fighting irresponsibly. But if anything good is happening, smart is happening, no one's cheering, they're booing. It's crazy. It's really disappointing.
And I just like, it's not necessarily that the Japanese people are like better people than the fans that are, that you're talking about, but it comes from a place of like information and education on something, like the reason people don't, the reason that there's a lot of people that don't boo when there's wrestling or clinching or jujitsu happening is because they know what's going on and they enjoy it. It still amazes me in 2026 how many people still have like a 2004 understanding of mixed martial arts from like the public.
Yeah. I mean, in Japan, if you pass the guard, the crowd goes crazy just from passing, and then it's silent again until something else happens. But like here, just the other night, I'm sitting here and I'm like looking behind me and I'm looking, I just want to smack all of you. And I just sit there feeling ashamed of the fans. I really do. And I feel bad for the guys fighting in the cage because they have to hear people boo, which is gonna, you know, maybe depending on how mentally strong they are, force them to do something that they probably shouldn't do at the moment. They're a little more educated than the guy sitting in the crowd. So it's, yeah, maybe it'll catch up, maybe it won't. I don't know.
I went to the LFA event in Louisville a handful of months ago, or like I don't know, it was probably further longer ago than it seems. But the crowd the entire time was shouting, like trying to. It's almost like in a movie theater when someone yells something out and is like hoping to get a laugh from a bunch of people around them. This
Yeah.
this toothless dude in front of me wearing like a like backwards Louisville hat with like the stupid cursive L that they have, it yelled twist his dick off at least 500 times that whole night.
Yeah.
And
That was the
people
first thing yelled at the UFC the other night.
people would still laugh on like the 50th one. There'd be people around, it's like, dude, like I can't tell you something's fun, not funny if you laugh, but have have a higher bar. And also, dude, these are like have some sort of respect or appreciation for what's going on here right now, and not doing the like. This isn't your 5 minutes of open mic. That is a super annoying quality in people that unfortunately probably will never go away at the regional shows, at least.
Because they'll never have to pursue, to deal with the consequences of it.
Yeah, that's the problem is that it can't or shouldn't, use violence against people for yelling stupid stuff, even though in a perfect world you'd be able to and there wouldn't be a problem with it.
It wouldn't take many. It wouldn't take many.
So, because pride is something that people like look back on now and want something like that in today's game, and the MMA world in total would probably be a lot stronger if there was another organization that's actually competing with the UFC for our like this champion like might actually be better than the UFC champion. There was that briefly with Strike Force. There was that, a little bit with some Bellator people over time. PFL and one, just like that conversation isn't really there. And I don't know whether it's fans having less respect for those promotions or, if that's just the time of MMA that we're in. The people that really had it right was the WEC. Put on high level fights of weight classes that people weren't, having fights at the time. But Pride is something that people look back on like, it'd be great to have that again and to put the UFC in some uncomfortable positions where they can't, do things the way that they did in 2003. They can't treat fighter. I mean, my God, they offered you an unfair 3-3 at first. I'm pretty sure that's what somebody just probably just made last week, fighting on an event. I'm, not that much different than it was.
No, for sure. I mean, it's only 10-10 to sign with the UFC.
And
Still.
here's the thing, like I'm never that worried about how much another grown man is making in any job. Like it's just never been in the purview of my concern. But objectively, for the UFC, they have to see that the writing is on the wall, and like the new compensations system that they have with the Paramount Plus deal, that is a step in the right direction. I think that some people in the UFC are hoping that it's the last step they'll ever have to take, but they have
Right.
to know that the writing is on the wall, and like eventually you're gonna have to drastically rework how you compensate fighters if you want high quality athletes in the UFC.
Yeah, my whole thing is it is it the best in the world? Are you recruiting the best fighters in the world? If it is, make it harder to get there and pay them more when they get there. But 10-10 shouldn't be anybody's. uh let's say he fights 3 times in a year and wins all of them. 60 grand. He's a 3-0 that year in the UFC and he makes 60 grand. That's your elite top of the sport. Like that shouldn't, if the UFC is the top of the sport, it should be the top of the sport guys in the UFC, and it should be maybe harder to get there, but and then they wouldn't have the overflow in the roster. That the too many people on the roster like they do right now. They're like 150 over on the roster right now. And but get rid of those 150, bump the pay up, double the pay maybe, and start to make it more difficult to get there, but pay higher when you do.
Yeah, I don't think that anybody running the UFC is stupid, which is why, like, a lot of things they say in this department, I kind of disregard because I don't think that that's what they actually think. Like, how many times have we heard Dana White say, this will never happen, I'll never do this? And he changes his mind plenty when it makes sense to him. Like,
Sure.
same when he said women would never be in the UFC. And one day,
That was the first thing I thought of when you said that.
someone, yeah, one day Ronda Rousey arrived, and instantly it made sense to Dana White and his wallet. So who knows what the future of that looks like? They go kicking and screaming kind of into those innovative things, but it'll have to change eventually, or else the UFC will suffer for it when your champions of the UFC are talking about, I'll defend it once, I'll go up, I'll fight for the belt in the division above me, and then I'll try to do a big boxing match and cash out, like, so that I'm taken care of after my career. It's like, man, like,
Right.
you do not want your top athletes having a contingency plan that isn't you for how
Right.
they're going to take care of themselves for the rest of their life. Because now it makes the sport in the UFC look worse by comparison because MMA fighters are only losing those big boxing matches for the few that actually get to do those big cash out events.
Right. Yeah, and with the new pay, uh, like for example, the Paramount deal is 7.7 billion for 7 years. So that's 1.1 billion per year that they can spend. If they spent 10 billion every single, or sorry, 10 million every single weekend for the entire year, they would still have $580 million left over for that year to spend. If they spent 10 million on every single weekend of the year, which they don't. So there's so much left over that can be put into places. That's just the TV deal, right? That's nothing else that they have sponsorship wise or anything else that they have. There's definitely money to be moved around, spread around. like I said, I'm not going to complain right now. My kid's waiting on a short notice fight to get into the UFC right now, so we'll take it. But like if you go in off contenders, you sign for 10-10. If you go in on a short notice, you sign for 12-12. Um, the night I fought Pat, I made $10,000. For fighting twice in one night. That was a long time ago. It should just be much higher right now. It should just be much higher.
So, then, fast forwarding to because you fought, and the last time you fought in Pride was Bushido 12 against Tetsuya Kawajiri. You have a couple fights in between. I think one fight in Cage Rage. You finish off your career with three straight fights in King of the Cage. The last two were in 2012. You were 40 years old. You finished with two straight submissions over Marvin Babe and Brandon Gaines. How did it feel at the age of 40 to be able to end your career with two straight wins in King of the Cage and go out on a positive note?
It was cool. To be honest, I had a pretty bad rib injury from Marcelo Garcia in 2005, and that kind of plagued the rest of my career after that. I had a lot of ups and downs because I couldn't train properly because it was constantly injured. And so I was kind of done fighting at that time. What was the gap before the Marvin Babe fight?
A little under 3 years, June
Yeah,
2000, April 2012.
right. So I hadn't fought in a long time, and that had never happened over my career. And my plan was probably to be done, but then my kids started training, and I opened a gym in Texas. And at that point, I was like, okay, I want my kids to see me fight live in person, not just on TV, and I want them to be there. So they got to come watch me fight and walk out and watch me fight those two times. And I had just opened my gym in Texas after moving there from California, and I wanted the people, local people to see me fight, and so my gym would, so I get a name going before I stop fighting entirely. And then I actually booked a third fight for King of the Cage, and the guy got injured, and then I got injured, and I was like, okay, I'm done.
So then after your professional MMA career, then you kind of turn your sights back to, participating in big grappling events. You then win three straight IBJJF Black Belt No-Gi World Championships, and you take the Pan Am No-Gi Championship in 2014. And also on Wikipedia makes a very interesting claim because it talks about, how you got into MMA, that you started training, in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And then it says later you became the first Nogi Jiu-Jitsu instructor in the United States.
Yeah, I was the first American to open a no-gi jiu-jitsu gym, and have no more gi and no gi classes, and yeah, I got blackballed from the Brazilians for a while. It was tough to get promoted by anybody and whatnot, but I was the first one to start doing ranked. We went with t-shirts first because there was no one really wearing rash guards yet. And then we went to ranked rash guards because I owned a company called No-Gi Industries, and we just started doing ranked stuff, and then everyone started doing ranked stuff. But yeah, I was definitely the first American to have a no-gi jiu-jitsu gym and be the first one to not put on a gi and get promoted without wearing it.
That's amazing. And to be because now, there's obviously such a greater focus on that because it is so much more practical for MMA purposes. And personally, I used to do gi jujitsu in high school. Now when I go to jujitsu class, I just go to no-gi classes.
Yeah.
One, I hate the process of making sure that a gi doesn't end up smelling horrific. Uh,
Yeah.
I I am not good at all the like dressing components with the gi. Like I never feel like my belt was ever tied right or anything. I hate like immediately having like as soon as you get down to the ground, someone puts their foot in the inside of your gi and basically undresses you like 40%. It's like, cool, can't wait
Right.
to fix that. And then al- also memories of being in like an MMA gym that was practically a warehouse, like in high school, on a Saturday morning in July, wearing a gi, and some dude who's outweighs me by 100 pounds is in full mount. It feels like I'm wearing a fireman's suit, and it's like, dude, I think I'm gonna do no gi exclusively from now on.
Yeah, man, I just feel like I was quick to understand that every time I grab the lapel, every time I grab the sleeve, every time I grab the pant leg, that is something that's no longer going to be there when I need it, when I'm training, when I'm fighting, and every single handle you grab is a false sense of security. You're building a habit that has nothing to do with what I'm going to need when it really matters, and I'm a fighter at the time. My goal was be fighting, not competing in jiu-jitsu. And so there was no carryover where it would matter. And then you hear everyone say, oh, well, Roger Gracie wears it, so-and-so wears it. So, well, yes, because they were the best jiu-jitsu guys in the world before, period. So when they took it off, sure, they're still the best jiu-jitsu guys, but it just none of it made sense to me to translate into MMA. And they said it would make your no-gi game tighter. Well, that's a lie, because when you take it off, you have to tighten things up. But if I was to put on a gi, it would for sure be tighter with all my, because I've already became tighter without the gi on. So it was just all backwards to me. So that's why I got in a lot of arguments and got blackballed from the Brazilians for a long time and whatnot. But uh, in my opinion, it does not make your no-gi game any better. Training no-gi jiu-jitsu properly for jiu-jitsu and to be tight and not use the slipperiness to escape, but actually figure out how to control someone that's slippery is, I think, a lot more effective than wearing a gi.
The gym I go to here in Newport, Kentucky, they'll do days too where they do like no-gi judo classes and stuff, or they'll like center class like when they do the no-gi jujitsu classes, they'll incorporate a lot of no-gi judo aspects, and I love that because otherwise, I you know I've done some judo back a long time ago, but it's like every time I think about that or anything that primarily happens with the gi, it's like I'm really just trying to focus on no-gi jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai, but no-gi judo, it's like this is stuff I can absolutely use.
Right. And how many good judo players used no-gi judo in the UFC? Ronda Rousey and Carl Parisian.
And
Other than that, really no one.
it, seeing how people have like over time kind of struggled to use pure judo at the highest level of MMA, it makes some of the throws that Carl Parisian was able to pull off that much more impressive in hindsight.
Crazy. Crazy. I trained with him a couple times. And if your feet get within 6 inches of his feet, you're going to touch the ceiling with your feet. You're just getting launched.
And Kayla Harrison, I guess, as well. Like,
Oh, yeah.
that, and for someone who like reached the pinnacle of international, judo success. Uh,
Yeah.
and so now, like, because you've mentioned it a little bit. I would love to have them on the show in the future too, like, whenever's convenient. But your sons, Lucas and Tyler, have very successful MMA careers of their own. What has it been like for somebody who has been through their whole career now watching your sons grow into and find tremendous success in that sport?
It's been awesome. I think we've done a fantastic job being really calculated about how we do it. The Bellator selling thing was a big bummer because Bellator was a fantastic company to fight for. They were smaller, real family-ish. They knew who you were and whatnot. It was very cool to fight for them, for Lucas. But me doing it on my own taught me a lot of lessons. So it's helped me really guide them in their career moving forward. And Lucas has been super successful so far, and that led us to waiting for a UFC call right now. Tyler, he was a multiple time jiu-jitsu world champion, then state high school wrestling champion, now Pac-12 Division I wrestling champion, and now he's 2-0 as an amateur and about to make his pro debut. in a few months. But he's now got to see me do it. Now watch his brother do it, and now he's jumping in. And yeah, it's just been there's a lot of experience here, and we started traveling with them as 12 and 13 year olds all over the country in jiu-jitsu. And then Lucas wins the British Nationals in London when he's 15. So we just, we've kind of got him. We flew to California twice and let them fight in the cage and in the pancration events when they were little. So just kind of got them really in this thing, so that they could make their decision. But if they did decide to make their decision, we weren't behind. We were ready to go. And like Lucas had options going into his senior year in high school if he wanted to wrestle in college, if he wanted to compete in jiu-jitsu at the highest level, or if he wanted to fight. And he said he wanted to fight. So I was like, okay, well, if that's what you think, because he was a kid who'd never been in a fight, sweetheart kid. And I said, okay, if you want to fight, then let's get a fight right now and see if you decide whether you do or don't want to fight. I said, you might win and never want to, or never want to do it again, or you might lose and want to do it again. Like you don't know. So we got him a fight a week before his senior year in high school started, and he fought a 26-year-old man. Rear naked choked him in the third round, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and folks, check out look into Tyler Brennan, the chosen one, 24 years old. Both of his amateur wins came just in the final months of 2025, October and December. And then Lucas Skywalker Brennan had a similar amateur career, like a fight with XKO, a fight with Tough Enough, and then like the whole professional career up until April 2024 was with Bellator and had an amazing record in Bellator. And Bellator like did that thing of like they almost had like development deals with like a bunch
Yeah.
of people and a ton of like former NCAA, wrestlers. They'd start their pro career with Bellator and work their way gradually up. And then, Lucas had two tough decision losses in 2024 to good opponents, Dimitri Ivey and Mauricio Gomez. Now he's coming off two straight rear naked chokes again, both in 2025. Most recent one at XKO 71 over Joshua Weems, who is certainly no opponent to sneeze at when you're talking about the quality of the win.
Yeah. Lucas was we were on the AJ McKee path. We asked for that literally the day we signed with Bellator. Want to go on the same route AJ did contractually, and they built him up just like they did AJ. And the goal was to continue with Bellator until we got to the belt, and then go through that Eddie Alvarez, Michael Chandler thing, where if we went to the UFC, it was going to make us a lot of money to go over there. Otherwise, he was happy where he was and making very good money at the time. And when the sell got announced, it was just kind of like, and that changed everything for him. He lost a lot of steam in his training and his motivation. Tyler had been planning on coming home from school and stayed an extra year and wrestled. That all happened at the same time. And so we did not like PFL at all. Lost a decision there, got released. Probably shouldn't have taken another fight yet, and he thought he wanted to fight again, so he did. Lost a split decision in Fury, and then he took some time off. He didn't train for a few months. He really took some time off to get his motivation back and figure out that that's what he wanted to do still. And it had just been pretty disappointed, and then decided he wanted to. Tyler came home from school. He turned up the heat, and we started coming out to Syndicate and training in Vegas. And Coach John Wood, got with him a lot, and he improved. He improved tremendously, and he had been getting better, but he hadn't made any huge jumps in a while, and he did in the last year and a half out here, and his two fights showed it. And he made quick work of Josh, and Josh is a stud, and he finished him in the first round. And finished the guy before him in the first round as well. And so, yeah, just now we're, getting to the UFC earlier. Had we gone to the UFC from Bellator, he would have signed for a lot more money, but then Bellator sold, and now we're back to scratch. He was making 66 grand a fight plus sponsors. So he was making about 90 grand a fight in Bellator. And now we're going to go sign for 12 and 12.
And Joshua Williams is a great measuring stick, like for people like, are you ready for a certain level of the UFC?
Right.
But Lucas Brennan, 11-2 as a pro, 9-0 in his time in Bellator, 25 years old, nothing but time to get, better and better as time goes on. So that's awesome. I would love to have Lucas on the show at some point. And you know,
In 2023, he was ranked number 7 in Bellator, and he was number 5 on the top 25 under 25 years old on ESPN's list of fighters, and he was the only one in the top 10 not in the UFC.
And with ESPN, like this is my point to your point about PFL. Like I watch PFL. I like PFL. A lot of the events that they put on. I think that a lot of their best fighters are really good fighters. I thought like Kayla Harrison was a godsend for them to be able to promote a fighter in a division that didn't exist anywhere else and say like, look, we have the top female 155-pound fighter in the world. No one else can say that. And, now she might be on the verge of eventually being the UFC bantamweight, of defending that against Amanda Nunes. But the thing about PFL is one, they've made so many innovative decisions that like a lot of them fell real flat. There have been a lot of weird business decisions that are explained by the fact that you've got a guy at the helm for years who recently stepped down, who admittedly does not like watching mixed martial arts. So, of course, the product suffered in a bunch of different ways. And, like they needed ESPN to give them stability, to allow them to get their footing and to give it a platform that a lot of people would see. At the end of the day, ESPN is too much of a sanitized, washed, like it's just too corporate, squeaky clean of a feel sometimes for mixed martial arts. And with the
Yep.
PFL, there's no distinct flavor like there was with Bellator. People can make their jokes about Bellator now when a former Bellator champion goes to the UFC and has a bad fight. You can make your jokes about Bellator, but Bellator had a distinct flavor. Bellator legitimately, had people that were either former UFC champions or went on to become UFC champion. Eddie Alvarez, Michael Chandler was a millisecond away from finishing Charles Oliveira in a second UFC fight. Bellator was fantastic, and people will not know how badly they miss Bellator until a little bit of time goes by, and then you really start to miss those days of Michael Venom Page fighting Paul Daly or Douglas Lima in those events. And
You need a second event. You need something else. There can't just be the UFC and nothing below it, but local shit shows. There's got to be another, whether it's a competitor or maybe it's even a feeder, but it just has to be another big event. Like Bellator could have been a feeder for the UFC if the UFC didn't, want to crush everything around it. And I don't know, there has to be something else for local people to fight in, or coming up people to fight in.
yeah, and like it's in a weird spot now. There was always that promotion. There was Pride, there was Strike Force, and the WEC was kind of like that. Then there was Bellator. Now, what would you call it? I guess you'd call PFL the second highest, but I think there's debate about that. There's Ryzen, which for my money is the pound for pound best at putting on entertaining cards. And also the quality of Ryzen's champions are phenomenal. But there's a bunch of like 2B, or there's 3 2B organizations right now. And then there's other things like bare knuckle boxing, bare knuckle MMA, karate combat, dirty boxing that has kind of filled another part of the void where it's like, hey, like if you're getting up there in age, maybe if MMA isn't going your way, if you're trying to make more money, there are these other options, and those companies have done very well to promote themselves and to give
Sure.
themselves, good fan bases and a good viewership.
Sure. Yeah. Uh, I don't even know if it's legal if they have their own under like smaller show. You know what I mean? Like they could even have their own. The UFC could even have their own smaller show, like a local show or something, besides like the Contender Series, but like an actual event that takes place regularly. Like right now, it's Tough Enough here in Vegas, Fury in Texas, CFFC on the East Coast. Like there's other events, but LFA. Um, but if they just yeah, I don't know. It's a tough position to be in at the moment as a fighter for sure.
And I think like, the pecking order for regional promotions is going to be changing a little bit over the next couple years because there's all these broadcasting deals getting reworked and everything. Now LFA is on Vice as opposed to UFC Fight Pass. I don't know how that changes things for fighters that want to be, with LFA, or how the UFC will, approach fighters in LFA when, it's something that people are going to be seeing less. So who knows what kind of fighters are going to want to be with LFA in the future? I just don't know.
And I had heard that happen because they have so many Russians and Brazilians fighting for them. And this is the first time, aside from Gaethje having the interim title, this is the first time there's not been an American champion across the board in the men's division. And so they are trying to build up and promote some American fighters out of here. And so LFA, what I heard, was not willing to clean up their roster and remove some of the Russians and Brazilians. So that's why they're not on Fight Pass. And so I don't know how that's going to take place or what's going to take place, but that was the rumor that I heard of why it happened. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the rumor of why I heard they got removed from Fight Pass. So now I think it's just Tough Enough, Fury, and CFFC.
It's weird because like LFA, a weird spot where that's an international regional feeder promotion. They put on events in Brazil. And so I can't imagine the logistics of doing that as a regional promotion, but also, it just puts you in a weird spot where it's like, what are you competing with the UFC? Like that's never been the idea. And I love the way that LFA is done. It's just a shame that it's going to be way harder for me to see what happens in LFA moving forward. Uh,
Right.
Now, Chris, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you for being here with me on Super Bowl Sunday, and us getting to have this conversation about a very long period of time in MMA history. The last question I have for you today is, now that you're in the role of a coach, you started your own gym in Texas, and folks, that is, I want to get the wording exactly right. That's Next Generation MMA that was started back in 1998. So, in your current role as a coach, running the gym, watching your sons go through this process, because when people look at the sport now, it's hard to think like what the next steps are. Like, how can the athletes get better? How do you get better at something that everybody is already amazing at in so many things? So, what do you think is one change that the sport is going to have to make moving forward? I guess besides money, since we already talked about that. And what do you think is the next evolutionary step forward for MMA fighters on their way up?
Man, I think it's so important to be in the right gym. Like my gym is in Texas, but I'm in Las Vegas right now, running the jiu-jitsu program at Syndicate MMA, and I'm splitting time here, but I'm actually here more right now than I am at home, uh, building up this program. Tyler is going to live here full time and teach and train and teach when I'm not here, but I'm here a lot at the moment, and I just think it's getting in a gym, to elevate. As far as you're talking about athletes, or you're talking about promotions.
Let's say athletes, like especially as a coach, like what do you think the athletes are going to have to do to take the next evolutionary step?
So I think you have to be in a room full of other top athletes. My gym at home, I've got 500 students, but only like 14 fighters, and three-quarters of them are amateurs. And then I come out here and there's 100 fighters and 20, 30 guys in the UFC. And so for my gym, and this is where it sucks for the guys at my gym, I leave and take my boys here to fight because they're the best guys in the room at my house. So we come here for the best guys. Well, that leaves the best guy back at my gym, who would have been the third best guy. He's now the best guy and doesn't have the greatest training partners either because he's the best guy. So does he leave? And if he does that, that leaves the next guy, and that's going to dwindle down to nothing. So fortunately, they're all, those guys are all kind of in the same realm of skill. There's some few brand new ones, but the top guys at my gym are all relatively around the same skill level. So they can get better. But I've got another student, Ty Johnson, who's from the DR. But when we left, he ended up leaving as well because he was like the next best guy under Lucas and Tyler. So he went back to the DR. So I think you just need to get in a room where you're not the best guy, and be training with. I think it's been that way the whole time. Back in my day, I was the best guy in my gym. I was training my training partners, but then there was guys like Pat Miletich who had a gym full of killers. Then came ATT, then came Jackson's, then here's Syndicate. And I think you just need to be until you are a very top guy. I think you need to be in a room like that. But to be honest, I see guys now thinking they can do it on their own and have their own. They travel with their coach and find training partners here and there. I don't think, and there's also guys who go to the PI and have like their own practice at the PI. I think they need the coaching. I think they need the coaching. I think they need to listen instead of thinking they know everything. And I think that's what will really push them over the top and get them to that top spot. And I'm watching it firsthand with Coach John Wood and the guys that he's training, and the guys that he is training are being successful. The guys who are kind of here and there, in and out of the gym, going to do their own thing, have not been quite as successful. And it's easy to see as an outsider. So I just think you need to. Your nutrition's got to be on, your recovery's got to be on, and I think you need to train in a room where you're not the best guy. And I think that will always stand to be, if you train with shitty guys, you're going to be shitty. You'll be the best shitty guy.
Folks, this has been another interlude episode of the Tap That MMA podcast. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow me on Instagram at RotoBrady MMA. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. Look out for my MMA, DFS, and UFL gambling content through RotoBaller as the weeks come on. I have been here today with an OG of the sport, Chris Brennan. Chris, thank you so much for being here. This was an amazing conversation. And if you have anything else you want to say or anything you want to shout out, the floor is yours.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it very much. Just follow me on Instagram, Chris Brennan, 3-time champ. Follow my kids, Lucas Brennan, Tyler Brennan, and then Jim's Syndicate MMA and Next Generation MMA in Frisco, Texas. Thank you.
Folks, thank you so much for listening. Have yourselves a great week and peace.